How do we navigate the delicate balance of enhancing family caregiver interactions within senior living communities? My guest today is Erin Thompson. She is a passionate leader in the senior living industry with over 2 decades of dedicated experience. She has a commitment to change lives within senior living communities, their residents, and their families. Erin is also the host of Aspire for More with Erin. In supporting families, it's important for senior living to ask the right questions to understand their concerns and needs effectively. Erin also has a personal caregiver story as she cared for her grandmother for 15 years. We look at the struggle that families have as they transition their loved ones into senior living. How do we provide that encouragement and emotional support to families during this time? We look at what does success look like for families, how important it is to build that trust in those caregiver-family relationships, and how we approach those conversations to ensure open communication. How can we as families better value and appreciate the hard work and dedication of the caregiving staff? And looking at the concept of the emotional bank, how do we build strong relationships between caregivers and families? And for families to not be deterred if they do see a not so favorable survey, and how communities can address those families' concerns. We know that misunderstanding can arise in any caregiving setting. How do we successfully resolve these conflicts between families and caregiving staff? And finally, as families, how do we overcome that guilt and shame and feel supported that we know we're making the best decisions for our loved ones? It's important that we're building that intrinsic value within people, and Erin does such a beautiful job of encouraging us, shifting our mindset, and offering hope as we learn about those dynamics. Here is my interview with Erin Thompson. Erin, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so happy to have you here, and we have some commonalities, right? We're not only in a founders group together, which has been so cool, but you were also a caregiver to your grandmother, so we share that connection. Tell us more about yourself. I want to hear how you got started in this world and a little bit about your caregiving experience with your grandma.
Absolutely. First, I want to say thank you to you because when I heard you talk at the cocktails and conversations that Aaron Fish hosts at Florida Senior Living, I sat there and I thought, wow, there's future me. There's somebody with a lot of passion about the same industry that I have. And it just was a real inspiration and it gave me a lot of hope and a lot of strength to keep going. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank
And thank you for having me here. Yes, I started my senior living industry career as a volunteer. Actually, I was in college and I was 19 and my grandfather needed a respite stay inside of a assisted living and I was helping my grandmother find a place. And at that time I wanted to be a sports broadcaster, so I loved the elderly people, but it just wasn't anything that was like on my radar. And then I walked in looking for places and it's like it just hit me right in the face, right? And so then I got the experience of taking care of my grandfather while he passed away. And then my grandmother became my college roommate. She became, everything to me. And I took care of her for 15 years. And then eventually she moved into an assisted living community that I was the executive director of. But she did have a respite stay in another community that I worked in. So she got to be a part of my career as well. And that path, that personal connection, that cemented so much for me. And it actually helped me succeed, I think, in layers of depth that if you don't have that experience, you might not be able to understand. So my career went from a volunteer to a part-time concierge to a full-time concierge to getting my big break as the sales and marketing director when I graduated college to becoming an executive director at 28 years old. And then here I am.
Here you are.
So
It's so true, those pivotal moments, right? When we're having glimpses of that with our family and then that exposure into senior living, I think it's so meaningful and it definitely guides our future and where our passion comes from. I know what most people I talk to, it's so cool in this space because it really is that personal connection We find that we are brought through this through some sort of personal story of care.
Yes, one funny story that I think highlights the importance of activities inside of senior living and the belonging aspect of it. She was a respite stay in one of my earlier communities, and my grandmother was a very stubborn person. Like, she did not get involved in activities. I did not necessarily expect her to come out of her room. I just expected her to receive the care after the
Mhm.
surgery that she needed. One day I was walking down the hall and she was inside the activity room banging rhythm sticks in the rhythm band. And
Oh, so
it was
good.
like a moment that just washed over me. And when you're inside of a world and all of a sudden you get kind of slapped in the face in a way like, oh my God, this is actually works for your family too. You know, she is
Mhm.
now one of them, the most stubborn woman I know, having a blast being a part of the rhythm band. Works. This
It does.
works.
Oh, how
So,
incredible.
that was a
So
big
fun.
that was a big moment for me in understanding just how important belonging and engagement is,
Mm.
whether you're in senior living or not, right? We
Mhm.
have many options out there to belong, but that was a huge moment for me.
Oh, just to witness it in real time, to see that come to life. One thing that really drew me to you was how well you not only articulate your passion and your heart, but given the audience that I speak to, your experience with caring for older adults and that caregiver piece, but also your senior living experience and wanting to have the conversation. I hear from so many families that their caregiving journey continues as our loved ones move into communities. I think a lot of times people think, okay, duty's over and they're going to be well cared for, which they are, but there's so
Mhm.
much that a family still has to oversee and navigate and emotional dynamics and taking care of financial and legal and all of the things. And so it's really how do we navigate this delicate balance of enhancing those family caregiver interactions within senior living. So looking at it from that lens, having your voice in the space and that leadership, I thought we could have some really good dialogue about it and some tips on both sides, right? I know there's definitely a senior living component here in my audience as well, just given my network. And the maybe I think too the stigma that some people might have when their loved one moves into senior living about
Mhm.
how do I navigate all of this? Who do I talk to? How do we make it effective? And in your role, you had so much interaction with families. So, how do we approach the task of asking the right questions to understand those needs and concerns effectively, whether it be from the family side of navigating, all of the dynamics of when we first move in and understanding what's happening, but also from the senior living side of really having compassion and awareness around what the family is going through.
Well, as a leader inside of a senior living, I was charged with making sure that my first priority was to change people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they came into tour, that's when the process started. And when a family wants to come into tour, whether it's an adult daycare, whether it's senior living, whether it's, you know, the hospital, right? We
Mm-hmm.
need to understand what success is to us. I think we don't take the intention, the ability to know that, yes, we may not be in control of everything, but we are in control of some things, and to be able to identify what that is. And being somebody who is empathetic and understands that concept, the first question that I want to ask or that I want to know as a family member is, what does success look like? And then what I'm going to ask as a leader inside any one of those places is, what does success look like to you? Right? What's not happening at home that tells you that's not being successful? And what do you want to see happen that's going to make you feel like it's successful? When we care for our children, when we care for our loved ones, we want to feel successful. So we have to know what we want,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
If we just go through the motions of things and let somebody else run the ship, we may not have that end result that we wanted. And then we have a lot of resentment towards where we are because we didn't necessarily understand what we wanted. So that's the first step. What do you want from a community? What do you want for your loved one? What do you see? There's also the what do I want versus what they want
Yes.
kind of
Isn't
scenario
that so
too.
true? Yeah.
Like I want somebody to be engaged at all the different activities and be so happy that they're there and all this other kind of stuff. But they may want to be in an apartment and just be loved by the caregivers coming in there and not be engaged in the activities program, right? Or eventually 6 months down the road, they come out to the front porch and they sit there. I would consider that success. It's the
Mm-hmm.
first step, right, of getting what we want. So I say number one for anything is, what does success look like to you? You have a loved one in the hospital. What does success look like to you? Identifying what you can control. You can control introducing yourself to the case manager, the social worker. You can control introduce yourself to the nurse. When's the doctor coming? I want to make sure I'm here. Let me tell you the nuances about my loved one. When they do this, it really means this,
Mm-hmm.
and all the different, they're very sensitive to medicine. So before you do something, can you give me a call? That kind of thing. When you know those things, then you can walk down the path feeling like you're in a little bit of control in a
Mm-hmm.
situation that may be going a little haywire. The other thing that I say is, have the hard conversations early. It's really hard to have hard conversations in the moment of hard times. There's a lot of emotion, there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of traumatic feelings going on, a lot of I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, and there's not a lot of understanding of the seriousness of the moment. So when we have these conversations, we can plant the seeds of, I only want what's best for you. We're going to do this for a little bit and then we're going to see how it goes. And that way we can lessen some of the guilt because, like you said, there's a lot of stigma when you have to move into a senior living community, which I hopefully am on a mission to remove that stigma. As a family, yes, as a family member, I felt guilt
Mm-hmm.
moving my grandmother into my community, elements of it. But then I was able to remove that because I could no longer meet her needs where she
Mm-hmm.
was. She needed more. And she was going to be around me 24, well, for the majority of the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Our loved ones will make us feel guilty even though their life has improved dramatically. And my personal experience showed me that. So my famous saying to family members who were struggling with guilt and shame
Mm-hmm.
was this, especially when moving loved ones into memory care, because that in itself is a whole nother ballgame that we can dive into. But unless you injected your loved one with a serum to cause dementia, or pushed them down a hill that caused them to break their hip, or whatever it was that triggered the need for senior living, you have no reason to feel guilty.
Mm-hmm.
If you're making decisions for your loved one through the lens of dignity, love, and respect,
Mm-hmm.
then you are doing the best you can. And that's all that's required,
Yeah.
period. And that gives people a sense of relief and
Mm-hmm.
hope. It's not
Mm-hmm.
easy making tough decisions, but when we get to make those decisions, that means that your loved one lived a life that was purposeful and long.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're just trying to find the next best phase for them.
Those are great reminders that we need to hear all the time. I feel like
Yes.
we can get stuck at times feeling a little overwhelmed about that, or like you said, that guilt about it. And yeah, just to constantly be reminded of that.
Yes.
Families often struggle with that transition. You had just spoke to that. And how do you feel that the emotional support and the encouragement takes place during this challenging time within senior living? And, as an add on to that question, how can we be doing that better? What advice would you offer to those listening around that?
I think that you have to ask for what you want. I learned through good experiences and bad experiences what works through transitions of time of move-ins. I haven't always, gotten it right, but you certainly learn through those challenging times what we could have done better. And through the times that I didn't meet my own standard and certainly somebody else's, I realized everyone wants to feel special and wanted when they make the choice to move their loved one into your
Mhm.
community. And so maybe not every community is set up that way. And so if you're a family member, you need to ask at the time of residency agreement signing or even before that, what is your process for moving in? Are you going to be at the door greeting us? Are you going to have some residents there to help us make us feel welcome and special? Because the level of anxiety and emotion walking through that door is so high that if
Mhm.
we do not um, explain and communicate what we expect, then the disconnect of what's delivered can either enhance the negative feelings or it can diminish the negative feelings. And so it's really important as a family, if you're not asked, to talk about what you want and what you expect. And then if you are on the senior living side, I mean, pull out all the stops.
Mhm.
I can have a party and have a line of people waving pom poms for somebody to come in, which I've done. But that's not always what people want, right? Having one or two people at the door may be better than having 12 people lined up saying welcome. And I think that's the other thing. You have to decide, what does this family want
Mhm.
and need versus somebody else. And so that's the main thing. I think you just have
Mhm.
to ask, really know what you want and then ask for it. I used to explain a lot to families when it came to memory care. Sometimes you need to not tell them where they're going until they get out of the car,
Mhm.
and that just feels so harsh. But then they don't get out of the car for 4 hours. And that's even worse because that's traumatic for the family member
Mhm.
who can't get them out of the car. And so it is our job as senior living leaders to look back through our experiences and create the patterns and the stories that we tell family members. And when through our assessment process or through the entire tour process, we get to know the nuances
Mhm.
and then create a plan that works for that family. That's the main thing. Ask
Yeah.
for what you want.
You mentioned the disconnect, and that can arise between families and senior living staff at times. How have you seen addressing or resolving those conflicts between families and caregiving staff be successful? How does that work where we can come together? I know I hear from families at times where they don't often want to say anything or bring up maybe some of their concerns they're worried about. How will mom be treated? And I always say it's okay, and you really can't worry about that because most communities really want to know and come in and make sure that the families are cared for and are heard and listened to in that way. But from you, how can families do that successfully and kind of bring up some of those concerns? I know ask for what we want, but if we dive a little deeper with the disconnect piece.
I believe that a good leader at the beginning is going to say to you, now that we've signed the paperwork, what does success look like to you care wise? We
Mm-hmm.
had a family one time, the resident was in memory care. And this is actually what spurred me with this conversation, with this question. It was a male resident and he was dressing himself, and we were proud of that. He was doing great. And the wife was getting very, very upset with us because the belt wasn't on. He had two shirts on, shoes that looked like shoes but were really house slippers to her he was wearing, and that was just not acceptable to her.
Mm-hmm.
And to us, we were winning because he's doing this himself, and we didn't necessarily push because it's still in his first 30 days. Well, then I realized, no, his appearance was very important to her. Clearly that was success to her,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to come in because they were so new. We didn't have that relationship necessarily built, and say, okay, here's where we see success. And this is what you're looking, this is your lens, and we're not seeing it. There's clearly a disconnect. And so then I realized his appearance was emotionally very important to her.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that experience, I started asking a question before move in. If we can get him to dress himself, where are our boundaries? Right? Do we consider success the belt on, the correct shoes on, or if
Mm-hmm.
he wears two shirts and he's proud of that, is that okay? Versus the basic ADL care that we're receiving.
Mm-hmm.
So start there, and then my job as a leader is to go and tell the caregivers, okay, Mr. or Mrs. So and so is moving in. Here's what success looks like to the family. And then it's the caregiver's job to do that. And the other thing that I do and that I would suggest, if the leader signing the paperwork with you doesn't talk to this about this, ask them, what are the personalities of the caregivers that are working in this general area? And I try to go over the personalities and the strengths of the particular caregivers that are working on that side. And then I tell the caregivers, when people walk into your area, into your hall, you are to welcome them. Make eye contact, say hello. You are valuable in this setting. And if a family that is new to a community can do the same thing to the caregiving staff, thanking them, telling them how important they are to their loved one and to them, and what a peace of mind that they're giving the family because of great care that they're giving them, then all of a sudden we're planting seeds of confidence, self-worth, and value. And I have seen some of the most beautiful relationships because it started with planting seeds of value and worth on both sides. If and when, because we're all people, mistakes are going to happen. We're not going to put the belt on one day, or maybe, something bigger happens, that we have a little bit of leeway because we are human and we do understand how important we are in the process. To me, that's the best way to do it, is planting seeds of value and worth at the very beginning.
On the family side, how do you feel, and what advice would you offer for families so they can better value and appreciate, the hard working and dedicated staff that are working in the community level? I think we don't always know what's appropriate, what we can say, all of those things. What encouragement would you give them in fostering that relationship and dynamic?
Words are important. So, right, we can say things to build up, we can say things to tear down. So the more that we can say positive things, the better. I think you can stack up the negative just as much as you can stack up the positive. And so if we can intentionally stack up the positive when the positive is very evident, and then maybe say something when you feel comfortable about, well, this shouldn't be this way, then there will be a very comfortable air about it. But I would say I have seen small things, just bringing somebody a milkshake or bringing a 6-pack or a 12-pack of Coke, of juice. I had family members every Sunday bring fried chicken to a certain part of the hall. And those, of course, are money things, but $5-6 for a 12-pack of Coke goes a long way. Being consistent with simple things helps people who may be struggling with, again, value, worth, purpose, or even having a bad day inside of their caregiving role. If somebody came up to them and say, hey, here's a Coke, I really appreciate all that you're doing. I know it's not easy, and I value your time here. That goes a long way. I have seen where families and caregivers I have never had to worry about a thing because they just respected each other so much. And then another family would come in and be talking to a caregiver that may have been a little questionable. And then this family member who has these great relationships, who's here every day, who sees the good going on, says, excuse me, let me just tell you my experience with this caregiver. And so something must be happening. Let's dive into this. And that was a powerful moment. It's just being consistency with understanding that our caregivers need the seeds of worth and value planted in them.
Yeah. And it's a concept that I don't know if we go to that first. So I love your lens on that, because in general, as humans, we need to feel, like you said, to plant those seeds of worth and value, right? And just when we pour that into people's lives and we speak to that, it can truly be transformational.
Oh, yes. But that goes for in-home sitters too. I mean, that's adult day caregivers. That's if you have in-home sitters. I mean, sometimes with the person that they're caring for, if they get a UTI or they have a bad mood, I mean, words just start spewing and behaviors start happening, and we may be caught totally off guard. And then when you have this built-in intrinsic value with this family, it just is a little bit different than not.
Yeah, it is. In our conversation, you and I had talked previously about the concept of the emotional bank. How does this work in the context of caregiving, and how does it help build those strong relationships between communities and families? And I know you're speaking to that a little bit right now.
I am not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I like to use my content and stuff about what to do and what not to do. So I'm very vulnerable in that aspect. But what I learned through trial and error and embarrassment and empowerment is the more that you can offer value on the front end and exceed expectations on the front end and dive into talking and really showing how much you care about their loved one. When something happens that can be not a big thing or a big thing, then you have got enough proof, you've got enough evidence to say, I really do care about what happens inside this community. I really do care that what happened, it's not who we are, it's just what happened. I have followed up with you enough and follow through with everything that you have asked me to do that, yes, I did forget this and I am so sorry. But there's enough evidence to show that I really do mean what I say because I've done it. And I have learned just through my own experience of being a mother, of course, my own experience with my grandmother, the more that you can talk to the families about what their loved one is doing. My office was by the door. So when family members would walk in or they were signing in and they were talking to the concierge, I would come out of my office and be like, let me tell you what happened. She did this today, or she actually ate lunch in the dining room today. Can you believe that? And that is, to me, a 30-second commercial that we give to our families saying, I'm the executive director and I see these things and I find it important enough to tell you about it. And so when they walk down the hall to where their loved one is, they're not worried what they're going to find. They're actually happy because we have achieved something that we've been working on, and the executive director cared enough to know. And so those things add up, and they in turn build confidence in me about this is working. These little signs of momentum, they trust me and I trust myself. And when the next hurdle comes, we're going to get through it.
It is that you've built that consistency over time in the beginning, so that if there are those hurdles, then we can go back and say, but I know what I know to be true previously. And there's a little bit of that evidence that we can pull forward to know that, okay, something else must be going on here, right?
Yes. Yes. And even I'll say this, like even in the beginning, like let's just say they asked to have something done in the room and it wasn't done, because that has happened. Even though I thought it was done, I just didn't check it. So at the beginning, I just realized I just took a withdrawal and I hadn't really made any deposits. And so in that moment, and this is a lesson for even if you're at home or wherever, in that moment, you just got to own it. And when you own it, there's a lot of respect that comes in owning it. I'm not going to kick the can to the maintenance director. It doesn't really even matter, right?
Yeah.
I'm the one that told the family that this would be done and I didn't check on it. And so I'm sorry, I got caught up. It didn't happen. Give me 1 hour and it will be fixed. And then you make sure it's fixed in 1 hour, even if you have to pull out the whatever to get it done, So owning it is the other aspect of creating that trust for people.
And on the trust side, one dialogue we had too was that at times we might be searching for a community, right? Where our loved ones potentially might move, and we could read a bad review, or they could have had maybe a not so great survey. Why is it important that we don't always overlook that? I know it's hard because we're so used to that, Amazon economy where we're checking the reviews and we go with the best one, but that there could be some nuggets of positivity within that. What's your lens on that?
Well, I worked for a community that had a very bad survey before I joined.
Mhm.
It was really, really bad. But the plan of correction and the management company and the consultant company that was in there turning it around was quite impressive. And I chose that challenge because I'm silly and I like big challenges, right?
Yeah.
I didn't realize how hard that challenge was going to be, but
Mhm.
it was a challenge nonetheless. And what I learned through that experience is on a personal level, when you feel like nothing's going your way,
Mm,
you have nothing to lose.
mm,
And that is power. Like, go out there and do whatever you can because you've got nothing to lose, right? So, what we did have going for us, though, was we knew everything that was going on inside of that community. And so, if
mm,
I were a family member who was looking and I went and looked at a community that had a bad survey, the first thing that I want to know as a family member is let's talk about what you're doing to correct it. And their response to that question should tell you everything that you want to know because there is great gifts in moving into a community that is under a large plan of correction if the plan of correction is being respected and being feared at the same
mhm,
time.
mm.
I was part of a training boot camp because the plan of correction was like this thick when I pulled the binder out. I mean, it was like 1,000 pages, I felt like, but it was the best gift in my life. And we were able to fill that community in less than 18 months from a 55% occupancy to
Mm.
100% with a 57 on the wall
Wow.
because the entire community literally was held accountable to that plan of correction.
Mhm,
It was the best time to be in that community. So, my best advice is ask the question of how they're overcoming it. And if that community can own it
mhm.
and they willingly show you the plan of correction and they're proud of the plan of correction, and you ask them more questions about that, I would say, and then meet the executive director and have the same exact questions, and you feel good about it, I would say it could be a gem. I really do.
Mhm.
But if they don't answer the questions with
If they're
confidence
being a little,
and
yeah, yeah.
and they don't own the story and they want to blame,
Mhm.
I would say
Red flag.
think twice.
Yeah.
Yes, think
Red
twice.
flag, red flag. It's so evident that when you talk about this, it comes from a deep personal commitment to wanting to make this industry better, and it is palpable. So, thank you for that. I
Thank
want
you.
you to tell us what you are doing and how you're continuing to share your mission and your passion with all of us and where we can learn more and connect with you.
Thank you. I've always had the passion to change people's lives. I'm learning how to do that in a different way. I have two podcasts. I have always loved serving the two groups of people that you serve inside of a community, which is the residents and their families,
Mhm.
and the associates and the leaders inside the community. And so I am figuring out how to do that effectively.
Right.
And I have two podcasts that I am a host of. One of them is for the families and caregivers inside their caregiving journey, similar to yours, but a little bit different. And that is the I Have Fallen and Need Some Help podcast. And that's both podcasts are on Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and
Mhm.
Spotify. And then Aspire for More with Erin podcast is where I take my passion and my knowledge and all of my mistakes and all of my successes and put it in there for everyone to hear. And in a personal development way, what I have learned for myself
Mhm.
is that my mindset was my biggest enemy, and we don't talk about that a lot
Mm,
inside senior living and even inside caregiving.
mm,
And so I use my own journey of way I used to think and the way I think now and how different I am because of it throughout my content, throughout my podcast topics, and on Instagram and Facebook. It's primarily caregiver related with some leadership, wrapped into it. And then
mhm.
on LinkedIn, it's primarily leadership with some caregiving wrapped into it. I'm trying to figure out the balance of all
Yeah.
of that, so bear with me, but that's where my heart is, that's where my
Mhm.
passion is, and I'm a
Mhm.
speaker and I'm just trying to branch out and use this passion in a way that helps others.
It's so fun to see it come to life and be able to cheer you on as it happens. And I think we're all learning every day, right? Even if we feel like we're in the place that we're supposed to be in and doing what we love, there's an element of constant learning and growing. And
Yes.
exactly what we need is that mindset piece that affects everything that we do, if we're in the right mindset for that, or can like change how we think about things so we can continue to be the best version of ourselves as we move forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a secret that I wish I would have unlocked years ago.
I know, me too. Me too. Well, I'm glad we're doing it now and that you're doing it
Yeah.
now. So thank you for this conversation. I'm looking forward to sharing your wisdom with others. You know, and it's hard to it's hard to cover everything within an hour, but we got a great I think foundation of that. And for people that want to learn more, dive deeper into leadership, mindset, caregiving, senior living, they can listen to your podcast and connect with you on those various platforms. So thank you, my
Yes.
friend.
Thank you. Thank you for being a soldier in your world and, making the way, paving the way for all of us behind you. So I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.